Are we in a bull market, or are we in a bear market, or a combination of the two? That's what we're going to seek to explore in this video today. Hey everybody, this is Pokemon Classics, reminding you that the classics never go out of style. Is the Pokemon card market in a bubble? This is a broad question, and one that I've seen a number of YouTubers, collectors, and investors weigh in on. On the one hand, we do see prices continuing to rise for certain items, but on the other hand, there's plenty of data out there suggesting a retrace. So what's going on? First, I wanted to address this graph that I've seen a number of collectors and YouTubers talking about, and I think it's pretty interesting when we compare it to Pokemon. This is the graph of a bubble, and in any bubble situation, there are certain distinct phases that emerge, and we're seeing some of these play out right now with the Pokemon trading card game market. Starting with an initiating event, like the government shutdowns and stimulus checks that we saw last year in March and April, followed up with an awareness phase as more people start realizing the potential behind the asset. And that leads to the mania phase, where now major news attention and celebrities and larger names are becoming attached with that asset. People would liken this to the presence of Logan Paul, Gary Vee, and other major YouTube channels, news organizations covering the rise of Pokemon. However, now we're entering that phase that some have speculated about, of being that bull trap downward part after the mania has subsided, and that's a real concern for a number of collectors out there. However, I wanted to caution against using this graph as a one-to-one comparison for something like stocks to Pokemon cards, because there are a number of factors that are vastly different between the two. I think we're sometimes too quick to give into confirmation bias, seeking out data that already proves our pre-existing hypothesis. In fact, we could use first edition Bulbasaur, the meme himself, 30K by Christmas, remember? Remember that? But we're actually seeing the opposite happen here. Rather than going up in value, Bulbasaur is coming back down. It's actually following the plot progression of that bubble chart almost perfectly, as Bulbasaur has gone from $1,800 in October, dropping down to $1,200 in November, and now bottoming out in January and December at roughly $600. It's following that chart almost perfectly. We could use that data to confirm our hypothesis and say the market is crashing, and panic and run around like Chicken Little thinking that the sky is falling. On the other hand, if we want to cherry pick our data in a different direction, we could look to first edition PSA 10 Charizard, probably the most iconic card in the hobby. There, we could draw the conclusion that Pokemon is stonking straight to the moon, that it's full steam ahead, as prices have gone from $220,000 just for one card in October, up to $300,000 in November, and having a couple different record prices of over $350,000 in December. That's why I think it's dangerous to put too much stock into any one position that applies universally to Pokemon in its entirety. The truth is, there's an existence of several submarkets within the Pokemon collecting hobby, and even in each of those submarkets, there's a variety of different factors that influence what's happening there. That's how we can have some cards increasing in value, while other cards seem to be coming back down to earth in a really rapid pace. So that's my underlying thesis for this video, is that in Pokemon, there exist a number of submarkets, and in every one of those submarkets, there's even smaller markets yet. And within those, there's certain factors that influence those cards. And the better we can understand the existence of those submarkets and what those influencing factors are, the more successful we can be as collectors and investors moving forward. So that's why you want to arm yourselves with knowledge and experience. Ultimately, those are the two best factors to help you successfully immerse yourself into whatever collecting that you're intending on doing. The more you know, the more experience you have, the better able you are to make those assessments. So let's use an analogy. I want you to think of Pokemon as the solar system. It's traveling through space together as one entity. It's held together by certain gravitational elements. But within that solar system are unique planets, and each one of those planets is like a submarket to Pokemon. Whereas planets have their own unique size, density, gravity, compositional elements, orbit, temperatures, etc., so too do each one of those distinct submarkets create their own microcosm due to factors like supply. What are the availability of those cards? The demand, how many people are interested in those cards? And the demographic of the consumer base. what's the income level for those cards, and what kind of interest is in those cards as well. Together, all those factors are going to determine whether that submarket is in a bear market or if that submarket is in a bull market. Now, with the name like Pokemon Classics, you guys know that I'm into vintage. That's where my interest and my expertise lie. However, I do want to acknowledge the existence of submarkets within modern cards, as well as promotional and trophy cards. Those just aren't my area of expertise. So we're going to focus primarily on what I see within those submarkets for vintage, though we will also touch on those others. There are three primary submarkets when it comes to vintage collecting. There are raw cards, graded cards, and those upper echelon investment cards. Now, when it comes to raw cards, these have the largest consumer base and the lowest cost of entry, whether they're appealing to binder collectors, set collectors, or even those that collect an individual Pokemon species. Nevertheless, one thing that does seem certain about these is that the supply for raw cards seems to be moving in a negative direction as more and more cards are taken out of circulation and submitted for grading. That leaves less mint and near mint copies available to the general population. At the same time, demand also seems to be going up. As new collectors enter the market, generally their entry-level area is for those cheaper, non-graded cards before they specialize and move up that ladder of collecting. What this signals to me is that raw cards tend to have the most stable growth, as they're experiencing a diminishing supply that then also boosts demand. Now, on the other hand, we also have graded cards, our second category. Now, graded cards have a slightly smaller consumer base, and this makes sense because those collectors are generally more serious about collecting and want their collection to be a bit more professional. One of the interesting things, though, is graded cards are experiencing significantly more volatility than the respective other microcosms of submarkets in Pokemon right now, and I think that's due to a disruption in the supply. As PSA and other grading companies have seen massive backlogs in their turnaround time, that supply was temporarily removed from the market, and now we've actually seen a major profit motive to submit cards for grading and then sell them, which has led to a major surge of cards coming into grading. Either way, that volatility is very easily seen in the graded card market. And this brings us to our third market, trophy cards and investment cards. Now, these are still graded cards, generally speaking, but these have the smallest consumer base. We're talking just a handful of individuals that can afford the cost of entry into this level. You might find some really high-ranking PSA 10 cards here, like the first edition Lugia that sold for $129,000, or your first edition base PSA 10 Charizard for $350,000. One thing to note is that the supply is relatively stable here. You're just not going to see too many more first edition PSA 10 Charizards just suddenly enter the market. At the same time, demand tends to be increasing as more people are taking notice of the hobby and more investors are entering the fray, seeking out those cards that could potentially appreciate in the future as the hobby grows. Keep in mind that most collectors are still relatively young, and that discretionary income is likely to increase as the years go on. It's just a matter of, will the hobby have staying power 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, when people reach their maximum earnings that are currently involved in the hobby? Perhaps because of those reasons, these investment level cards have not seen the significant retrace that some of the graded cards have seen below them. In fact, this market seems to be entirely less dependent on the rest of the market as a whole. It's crafted its own microcosm with its own unique factors, its own unique consumer base that remains uninfluenced by what happens below it. Now, although these are separately existing submarkets, it is important to note that what happens in one of them can influence the others. For example, if graded cards suddenly shoot up in price, their corresponding raw cards are also going to increase in value due to the connection between those two. Similarly, if we see a massive drop in some of those investment level cards, that might shift consumer confidence in those lower value items along with it. These submarkets can also be seen in a number of other areas of Pokemon, and I just want to be upfront that I don't have a ton of experience with promos and with trophy cards, or even with modern card collecting. However, I think we can still peg a couple of these existing categories and draw some conclusions about it. For example, we can see this with promos and trophy cards as well. Down at the bottom, there are the participant level cards, and these have the largest consumer base because they're available to the general public, perhaps through a tin, or through a special box, or maybe just through a distribution from a promotional event. These cards generally have a supply that's very high, and a demand that's relatively low because of how easy they are to acquire. And so those factors generally make them less valuable. On the other hand, if we kick it up a notch, there are certain promo cards that are available exclusively through certain releases, whether geographically or through special events. These are where maybe you get your Mario and Luigi Pikachus, your Scream-based cards, the Staff Edition Charizard that was released as part of the Evolution set. And these cards have a much more limited supply, and therefore their demand is also growing over time and is likely to be a better investment than some of those generic promo cards beneath them. At the top of the mountain, we still have our investment level cards, our trophy cards, and these have a set level of supply that remains relatively unchanging. This is also where our smallest consumer base is. This is where the deep pockets in the collectibles market and in the investor market is, and that's why we're seeing these cards continuing to increase. For example, the Trophy Kangaskhan recently sold for $150,000, which was unpredictable to a lot of people just a year ago, and yet those prices seem to be on track with what other similar trophy cards are going for today. Similarly, the Pikachu Illustrator card, often revered as the holy grail of Pokemon cards, and PSA 9 traded with a value of over $900,000. It was a trade involving a bunch of Charizard cards for just one Pikachu Illustrator. Now, if we were in the bubble and we were following that graph as many YouTubers and experts have suggested, these prices just wouldn't make any sense. And so I think what does make sense of this is that these are different submarkets, and one can be going down and experiencing trouble with the supply chain or with the demand, while another one is doing just fine. Our awareness of those submarkets is absolutely crucial. We can even see those submarkets in modern cards, where you have playable cards which generally have a massive population, and the demand can change a little bit. There's definitely a short-term demand for Vivid Voltage and other modern releases right now, but as new cards and new editions get printed, a lot of those played cards will lose their value. Similarly, there are collector cards that exist even within modern, and some of those might include your rainbow rares that have a more difficult attainability. Maybe you have your full arts that have a lower pull rate. All of those things are going to appeal to the collector side, not just to the average kid that's looking for cards to play with. Then at the same time, we still have our investment level cards, those trophy cards, seen at the modern level, and those still command a pretty hefty price tag and have a very significant demand to go along with them. So when the question is asked, is Pokemon in a bull market or a bear market? The answer is it's going to depend on which submarket and which card specifically we're looking at. And that's the simple truth, is that there are no simple answers here. And to try to apply one is a logical fallacy known as a hasty generalization. So for those reasons, I think it's erroneous to think of Pokemon as a one-size-fits-all. The market is really more of a solar system, with different planets that are governed by their own size, gravity, compositional elements, temperature. So too, different submarkets within Pokemon are influenced by factors like supply, demand, and the demographic of people that are ultimately seeking those cards. Again, you can arm yourselves with knowledge and experience, and ultimately that's going to be better for you than listening to any one expert, any one YouTuber that's basing their information on just one set of data. While graphs like this are certainly interesting to look at and might house some insights for us looking into the future, I would be cautious of applying this too directly to Pokemon, which again is a very different asset class than a stock. When you take one stock of Tesla and compare it to another stock of Tesla, they're not going to have a different condition level, they're not going to have a different rarity, and they're not going to have that collectible appeal that we see with Pokemon cards. Now that doesn't mean that Pokemon cards are always going to go up in value, or that the sky is the limit. What that does mean is we should be careful and cautious not to draw any hasty generalizations. If you guys enjoyed the video, consider giving it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. I really enjoy making these videos for you and providing some of my experiences and insights and sharing some of my collection. Anyway guys, I'm Pokemon Classics, reminding you that the classics never go out of style. We'll see you guys with the next video. Take care everybody.